Hello there. I'm Dr. Autumn, leadership consultant, wellness coach, author, and I'm incredibly grateful to be your host of the Align Living podcast. I'm here to equip you with the tools, inspiration, and practical tips necessary to lead a life of wholeness and pursue greater shalom in your life and that of your families, teams, and communities. My mission is to empower you to lead from a place of holistic well-being. It's time to say peace out to the fatigue, fog, and frustration of living in a place that lacks abundant well-being. Join me as we embark on a comprehensive exploration of spiritual, physical, mental, emotional, social, and economic well-being, all within the comforting embrace of one podcast. Hey there, good people. Welcome back to the Aligned Living podcast. Dr. Autumn here. Episode 30, y'all. I'm really excited about this. So, being episode 30, having made it this far, I am actually going to be talking about a topic today that I think is one of the most significant for you to really internalize on this journey towards wholeness. And this episode is going to be all about the stories that are running your lives. So I'm sure I've mentioned it here and there in the past episodes, just a discussion around narratives that we hold on to, narratives that we believe. And these narratives are so significant in our pursuit of shalom in our lives. And so I just want to talk about this for a minute. When I was thinking about where to start, because this is a big topic here, the first thing I thought about is how easy it is to recognize unhealthy narratives in our society, but how difficult it is to recognize the unhealthy narratives shaping us personally, right? I've told you, I started out in community development, and all day long we could identify these narratives that are impacting our culture that we will stand up for, that we'll advocate for, that we'll mobilize for. But then, in my work as a health coach and working with leaders around their pursuit of wholeness, individually, we just have so many things that get in the way of us truly, honestly acknowledging what stories are shaping us. Personally, oftentimes to the negative, right? A lot of these narratives get in the way of the goals that we're trying to achieve. So again, we can look at culture and say, oh my goodness, that's so unhealthy, or that's toxic, that's not sustainable, that mindset's damaging communities, right? But then when it comes to our own lives, we're justifying and we normalize and we adapt and we cope and we avoid and we numb. So hence episode 30. So let's buckle up and dive right in, because I'm really, really excited about this. Take this to heart and it will make a difference in your life. So sometimes I would say that we don't even realize there's a narrative running underneath our choices. As you know by now, I'm very passionate about talking about choices, because aligned living's all about if you're here and you want to be over there, that gap in between, what bridges that gap? It's a culmination of the choices we make. We need to make good choices. So what informs our choices? I love looking at the integration of spiritual formation with science and how God made our bodies and what impacts our choices, right? But this is an area that is not as much science related as it's just fact, right? Because the truth is, most people don't actually, I wouldn't say most, but a lot of people sometimes don't need more information. They already know some of the things that would help them, especially if you've been listening to my podcast and taken away all the tips that I've been sharing. People, they know they need rest, or maybe they know they need boundaries or healthier relationships, or should be processing their emotions and just have been avoiding that. Or maybe some people know that they need healthier rhythms in their lives, been telling yourself, I need more sleep, I need to drink more water, I need to cook more. People know their bodies are exhausted. They're feeling fatigued, living off of caffeine instead of the things that actually energize us. People know their stress is unsustainable and they just live in this place of chronic stress. So people have the tools and they know what's wrong. But narratives can be tremendously powerful. So we're going to address some of them because I think when we come face to face with, honest conversation with ourselves, that can help be a catalyst for the change. So if we never challenge these stories underneath our lives, we just keep recreating the same unhealthy patterns over and over again. And that's where this episode, where the inspiration for this episode came from. I'm going to say that again. If we never challenge the stories underneath our lives, we can keep recreating the same unhealthy patterns over and over again. I think one of the greatest barriers to online living and shalom is not just a lack of knowledge, it's these unconscious narratives. Stories we've normalized, stories we've even inherited, stories culture rewards. Now, that becomes a huge challenge there, right? Stories our families modeled, stories our environments reinforce. And eventually those stories just become the lens through which we make decisions. Okay, so now you're seeing the direct correlation between this topic and aligned living. So we like to think that we make purely rational choices, right? But so many of our choices are deeply connected to narratives. So, for example, somebody functions in chronic exhaustion for years because they've normalized this story, right? This is just adulthood. This is just leadership. This is just parenting. Everyone is tired. I'll tell you, this is a soapbox of mine. I will get fired up about the normalization of chronic fatigue because it so much impacts your ability to live well. Okay. So, again, this is a really powerful example of what I'm talking about. So, instead of asking, like, why is my body constantly depleted? The solution becomes more caffeine or more stimulation or more coping or just more pushing through. And it's not because they're lazy, not because they don't care, but because the narrative normalized dysfunction. Okay. Again, speaking truth here. I want to be honest with you because I'm asking you all to be honest with yourselves. And my journey, I have to live this brand, right? So every day I'm asking myself to make sure I'm functioning in a place of wholeness. Like, are there any underlying stories or narratives that I'm believing? Okay, so this is really important that me as your coach can be truthful with you and push a little bit here, because these narratives often that are keeping us from our goals have caused us, again, I'll say it again, to normalize dysfunction. And then it shows up everywhere. Okay. So I'm going to break this down into a couple categories because some people conceptually that is enough to drive it home. But I want to get a little more specific so you can potentially relate to some of these examples. So, talking about physical health for a second, I know just for all the years of coaching that some people genuinely believe that they're just too busy to eat healthy, or that they don't have time to cook, or that meal prep is just completely unrealistic, or that fast food has just become part of life and that's the way it is, or I'll focus on my health later. How many of you have at least heard one person in your life say that? Like, oh, like for now, I got to do what I got to do. I'll take care of that later, right? But as you may or may not know, those diseases that people accumulate, that chronic pain, that the fatigue, the lack of wellness, that starts when you're a kid, right? And so then when you're a young adult and you're just pushing through, those choices again are impacting how you live as a middle-aged person, and then that's impacting how you live as an older person, right? So these years go by living disconnected from one's physical well being, and that's not good for us, right? And again, I don't think it's because people don't want health, it's because the narrative that people have created have supported unhealthy rhythms. So it makes health feel like it makes being unhealthy feel inevitable because it's just the way it is, right? Because of the story we're telling ourselves. Another one that I hear all the time, I'm exhausted, but that's just normal. So instead of asking deeper questions about sleep, about stress, about nourishment, about nervous system regulation or hydration or inflammation, even emotional overload or recovery, we normalize fatigue and then medicate it with stimulation. All right, there is a reason In my aligned living community, my membership platform where I bring people together, we go a lot deeper, coaching you through step by step how to get to where you want to be. There's a reason in my foundational lessons that I talk about honesty, asking good questions, because if you don't, it's a non starter. Because in order to, again, as I'm talking about narratives, I keep saying, you know, you can accept a narrative or ask the question, right? Because if you fall into the narrative, you fall into the bad habits. If you ask the deeper question, then you'll be able to actually address the solution, the healthy solution, right? So again, I'm exhausted, but that's just normal. Try asking yourself questions about what's impacting your sleep. How are you managing stress? How are you nourishing your body? How are you regulating your nervous system? How are you staying hydrated? What about inflammation in your body? Is your diet supporting um, increased inflammation levels or decreased inflammation levels? How are you handling your emotions? How are you recovering? Okay. With that being said, I also want to talk about emotions a little bit here because physical health, that's clear. Um, but let's think about the emotional narratives in our lives because it does not matter what you think about yourself, whether you're like, I'm emotional, I'm not emotional at all, I'm somewhere in between. The reality is, emotions are part of all human beings and how we function. Okay. However, a lot of people were taught emotions are weakness, or stop being so sensitive, or just push through, or don't cry about that, or be strong, ignore that. So then what happens? Well, people suppress emotions for years and then wonder why they feel so disconnected or reactive or numb, even, or anxious out of the blue, or completely overwhelmed or emotionally exhausted. Because ignored emotions don't just disappear, they still shape us. And honestly, some people are terrified of honest conversations with themselves because awareness could be tremendously uncomfortable. But also, you won't be free until you do this. And the opposite's true. That's like suppressed emotions. But for people who have not learned how to regulate their emotions in a healthy way and they're functioning out of letting emotions control their choices instead of taking those emotions in as information, not controlling the narrative, but as information to help inform your upcoming choices in a healthy way. Okay, so it's for all of the above. Like there's emotional health narratives around everything and anything. So speaking of, emotional awareness is also intimately connected to our relationships and social well-being. So let's talk about some relationship narratives for a second. Some people are living inside stories like, well, everyone leaves eventually, or commitment is just too dangerous, I don't want to go there. Or what about I can't trust people, I have to protect myself. Needing people makes me weak. I've heard that one before. Although clearly God calls us to live in community, we're not meant to live in isolation, yet this narrative overpowers people and their mindset in so many ways. How about this one? If someone gets too close, I lose my freedom. Or conflict means the relationship is failing. Although we all know, recently in my nonprofit org, we talked about how important conflict is for health and growth. It's that fine line. Like you don't want to be in constant conflict, but we cannot grow without some disagreement or without some face to face with conflict, because that supports growth when handled in a healthy way. Okay. So these narratives shape our choices. If we're believing these things, it's going to shape our relational choices, romantic relationships, friendships, family, all of it. They shape vulnerability, communication, intimacy, boundaries, avoidance, attachment patterns, the kinds of relationships we tolerate, and the kinds of people we pursue. This is so relevant because you could be out doing all the things in the world, but if your relationships are suffering because of the narratives you're telling yourself, it is going to impact every other area of your life. Sometimes people deeply desire connection while simultaneously operating from narratives that make healthy connection feel unsafe. And if we never become aware of those narratives, we can sabotage the very things we say we want. And that's what's so ironic. This is why episode 30, I wanted to talk about narratives in the story we tell. We want to be healthy. We want good relationships. We want financial sustainability. We want a strong healthy mindset. We want our thoughts to support us, but our narratives are going to control these things if we don't become aware of them. All right? So another one that's really relevant to my work, because I'm in leadership development, right? Like my doctorate was in transformational leadership, and so this is one I see a lot. Some people genuinely believe that my value comes from achievement. If I stop producing, I lose my significance. Being needed gives me worth. I have to prove myself and I can't disappoint anyone. If you put those pressures on yourself, now goals are good. We want things to work towards, but if they're tied to your value and your worth, those um, narratives are going to push you into an unhealthy performance mode instead of pursuing shalom and letting that abundance of well-being be your fuel, spiritually, physically, mentally, be your fuel for performing in a healthy way, right? And having that balance. Eventually, if you don't, you'll build an entire life around performance, okay? And we see the negative consequences of that: burnout, lack of sustainability, frustration, overwhelm, too much stress, the list goes on and on. So this is really important because many unhealthy narratives are socially rewarded. That's why we have to have these honest conversations with ourselves, take it to prayer, have good people in your life to talk to about this. Overworking is praised. I mean, I live in the DC metro area, we call the DMV, DC, Maryland, Northern Virginia. Overworking is praised, busyness is admired. I mean, people walk around talking about busyness like it's a badge of honor. There was a few books released, I would say, in the past 5 or 10 years that have been pretty popular, that just challenge the hustle culture. Like, let's be successful, but let's also understand that success is also tied to how well we live. How are you as a human being, not just human doing? How are you showing up in this world, having margin to care for people, to be a good human? You know what I mean? So some other ways that unhealthy narratives are socially rewarded: emotional suppression is called strength. Okay, we're seeing this shift a little bit with more public figures talking about mental health and going to therapy and using more natural, healthy modalities, being out in nature and different things like that to, kind of counter this narrative, but it's real. Constant availability is called commitment, another unhealthy narrative. So, boundaries is, if I could, you know, have every young person master something earlier on in life, it would be boundaries. Um, self neglect is called sacrifice, right? Like, how often do we have to tell people, especially parents, like, self care is not selfish. Your self care is helping you show up better in the world for other people. So, anyways, when it comes to these narratives, we have to be mindful because they're socially rewarded. So eventually we just stop questioning what is in our heart because everyone around us is doing the same thing. This is again why self-assessment, honesty, self-awareness, so and so important. So here's the thing. When we see unhealthy narratives in society or organizations, we often want to challenge them, though. Again, this is what I was talking about in the beginning. We can recognize them collectively. We say the system's unhealthy, this culture's unsustainable, this environment is damaging people, and so on. But individually, why is it so much harder? Because challenging personal narratives requires honest self-confrontation, and that could be uncomfortable. And on top of that, it actually requires slowing down long enough to ask, what story am I living inside of? A lot of people, they have their space for relaxation, right? We know this. People are scrolling on their phones and Netflix and all this stuff. The problem is we keep our minds so constantly stimulated that we work, we go from this to that, and then when we have a moment for this self-confrontation, asking yourself, reflecting on these things, what story am I living inside of? Instead of creating just space to do that, we move into constant numbing, right? So honestly, a lot of people stay busy because busyness protects them from this self awareness. All right, hold on to that one. Wrapping up here, narratives eventually become norms. And these norms, as we know, shape our culture, and culture, as we know, shapes people. So we have to start with the narratives, the stories we're telling ourselves, because eventually those narratives will shape our bodies. It will shape our health, our relationships, our leadership, our emotional health, our organizations, our spiritual lives, all of it. You cannot build shalom on top of narratives that normalize fragmentation, okay? And this is clearly because shalom is wholeness, right? Like if we need wholeness, we're acknowledging we're integrated. We can't normalize fragmentation. Integration, alignment, these things are so important. Alignment to me is a right relationship with God, with ourselves, with others, with creation. Many of us are trying to pursue wholeness while still operating from these fragmented stories. It just both cannot exist at the same time. So, with that being said, the deeper question is not just what habits do I need to change, right? Like that's a lot of what we talked about before. If I'm educating you on nutrition or, mental decluttering or thoughts or emotions or healthy relationships, whatever it is, we need to ask ourselves the deeper question: what narrative is driving my choices? Like that's the why. Like, why is this happening? We know what is happening, but why? So I'm going to give you some questions to really slow down and ask, and you might have to listen to this episode twice. Why do I struggle to rest? Or let's say if you do rest pretty well, but you have poor sleep. Why do I struggle with poor sleep? How about why do I avoid vulnerability? Why? Why do I constantly overwork? Or why do I try to get by with minimal work and just fill the rest of my time with things that are not moving me forward? How about why do I normalize exhaustion? Why have I just accepted that chronic fatigue is okay? Why do I stay disconnected from my body? Why do I avoid conflict? Why do I numb? Why do I feel guilty slowing down? Why do I push past my limits? Why do healthy relationships sometimes feel uncomfortable? Why do I feel unsafe when things get calm? These questions matter because awareness is often the beginning of transformation, okay? So, aligned living requires healthier narratives. So excited about this episode and for you to hear it. It's not perfect living, it's not performative living, it's truthful, integrated living. So, just to kind of wrap up with a couple like contrasts, just to hold on to. An old narrative you might be carrying is my body doesn't matter spiritually. A healthier narrative is saying stewardship includes physical well being. I'm naming some that I constantly see. An old narrative might be exhaustion is normal. An healthier narrative would be chronic depletion is a signal, not a badge of honor. An old narrative could be I don't have time to take care of myself. I was just talking about that in regards to parenting. A healthier narrative would say my rhythms are shaping my future capacity. My health matters. Your health matters. Old narrative, emotions are weakness. A healthier narrative would be emotional awareness supports wisdom and discernment. Nobody wants to think that they're emotionally immature or emotionally, what's the other? Emotionally immature. Um, we all want to believe that we're regulated when it comes to our emotions and healthy when it comes to our emotions. But if you believe emotions are weakness, that is not emotional maturity. Emotional awareness supports wisdom and discernment. Hold on to that healthier narrative. Old narrative is vulnerability is unsafe. A healthier narrative would be healthy connection requires honesty and courage. I'm going to wrap up with the fact that Jesus embodied this. One thing I love about Jesus is he did not just model a frantic, disconnected, performative living, not in any way. He withdrew when needed, he rested, he grieved, he felt compassion, he slowed down, he noticed people. One of my favorite things, he honored limits and lived with intentionality and presence. Jesus modeled embodied wholeness. So, my challenge for you this week is I want you to identify one narrative shaping your life. Ask yourself, what story have I normalized? And it will be easy for your mind to go to what other people are normalizing. Think about in your life, where do you want to go? What barriers in the way, and where does a story that you've normalized contributed to that I don't want to say dysfunction, but that challenge? Now, where did it come from? Where did that story come from? What is it producing in your life? And what would a healthier, more truthful narrative look like? Then meditate on that every day, multiple times a day, because it will take work to overcome this story. Your life's moving in the direction of the stories you believe. Some of us are exhausted, not simply because life is hard, but because we're living inside narratives that quietly pull us away from wholeness. So, shalom invites us into something different. That is my whole passion and vision for aligned living. I want to invite you into something different, not perfection, not hustle, not performance, but alignment. So much goodness comes from that place. That's where integrity lives, and wholeness, and awareness, and wisdom, and sustainable flourishing. And sometimes transformation begins with one honest conversation with yourself about the story you've been living inside of. So a lot of times we hear these challenges and we just like, okay, cool, check, done, listen to my thing for the day. But want to challenge you. If you haven't before, just please challenge yourself. Ask yourself this question: what stories are normalizing? Where did it come from? What's it producing in my life? And then what would a healthier, more truthful narrative look like? So thank you for spending some time with me. Can't wait to be back with you again. And until then, keep striving to stay aligned. Thank you for tuning in to the Aligned Living Podcast. I'm Dr. Autumn, your guide on this journey to shalom or wholeness. Ready to embark on this journey of self-discovery and transformation? Head over to autumnswain.com to learn more and to dive deeper into the world of aligned living. Until next time, stay aligned.